I was standing at the pulpit of St. Luke's Church in the South End. It was a damp gray Tuesday in October. I was holding the eulogy for my husband Arthur. The paper was trembling in my hands. I could smell the heavy scent of lilies and old varnish. My voice echoed off the stone walls. He was my soulmate, I told the crowded room. He was the only man I ever truly loved. I looked down at my son Kavi in the front row. He was staring at his shoes, his jaw clenched tight. I adjusted the microphone, trying to stop the feedback squeal. That is when the heavy oak doors at the back flew open. A cold gust of wind rushed down the center aisle. It blew the candles out on the altar. You know that feeling when your blood runs cold? That is exactly what happened. A woman was standing in the doorway. She had ice blonde hair pulled back into a severe, tight bun. She was wearing a black trench coat, belted at the waist. She looked like she had stepped out of a noir film. She started walking toward me. Her heels were clicking on the marble floor. Click, click, click. The sound was rhythmic, calculated. I couldn't take my eyes off her. I checked the records later, but in that moment I was paralyzed. She didn't look at the mourners on either side of her. She only looked forward. Her eyes were locked on mine. They were blue, cold, dead. I felt like a fraud, though I didn't know why yet. My grip on the wooden lectern tightened until my knuckles turned white. I remember thinking, this is a mistake. She's at the wrong funeral. But she walked straight to the front. She stopped right next to the coffin. The priest stepped forward, his robes rustling. "Madam," he said, "we are in the middle of a service." She ignored him completely. She reached out and touched the dark cherry wood of the casket. It was a possessive touch, like she was checking to make sure her car was still parked. Then she looked up at the pulpit. "Stop speaking," she commanded. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "You have no right to be here," she said. The gasp from the crowd was deafening. I saw phones go up in the air. People were recording this. I know there is a photo of me from that exact second. It was posted on the neighborhood Facebook group that night. The timestamp says 10:14 a.m. In the picture, my mouth is hanging open. I look like a ghost who has seen another ghost. I couldn't breathe. I looked at Kavi. He was standing up now. He looked confused. He looked angry. I wanted to scream at him to sit down, but my throat had closed up completely. I was a librarian for 35 years. I devoted my life to the truth, to facts, but nothing in my library had prepared me for this lie. She walked right up to the coffin, placed a manicured hand on the wood, and looked me in the eye. "Who are you?" she asked. "And where is my husband?" The priest froze. His hand hovered over the Bible. The microphone squealed, a sharp, piercing sound that made everyone cover their ears. The silence that followed was heavy. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Kavi stood up immediately. He turned around to face her. He blocked her path, but she didn't flinch. He asked her to leave. His voice was shaking, trying to be the protector I needed him to be. She ignored him completely. She wore a black trench coat. I could see raindrops glistening on the collar. She looked like a storm cloud that had drifted inside. She reached into her purse, a black leather thing. It looked expensive. She pulled out a laminated card. She shoved the paper into my hands. It was stiff. The plastic was warm from her grip. I looked down. It was a marriage certificate, dated August 14th, 1989. I felt sick. You know that feeling when the world tilts? That was happening. Arthur never had Facebook, no LinkedIn, no digital footprint past 1995. I thought he was just private, old school. I respected that. I checked the records twice. My marriage to Arthur was in 2001, 12 years after this document. This was before I even knew his face. I looked at the signature. Arthur Vance. The loop on the A was sloppy. The slash through the T was aggressive. It was his handwriting. I've seen it on thousands of library checkout slips. The paper was yellowing at the edges. The seal from the Ohio courthouse was raised. I could feel it under my thumb. It said Arthur Vance, not Earl Baines. The name on his passport was Arthur. The name on our mortgage was Arthur. But he told me his first wife was dead. He said she died in a car accident. He was so specific about it. Tears in his eyes when he told the story. My knees buckled. I couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. We moved to the lobby. The air smelled of floor wax and old incense. The crowd in the lobby was murmuring. I could feel their eyes on me. They were hungry for drama. I felt like the main attraction in a tragedy. I felt my purse slip from my shoulder. It hit the tile floor. The clasp snapped open. My lipstick rolled away. A pack of tissues spilled out. My keys skittered across the stone. I didn't move to pick them up. I just stared at my hand, my wedding ring. It suddenly felt like a costume prop, like something from a cheap play. I want to ask you something. Have you ever felt like a stranger in your own life? Like you were playing a part you didn't audition for? I looked at the date on the certificate. Then I looked up at her. My voice was barely a whisper. I said, "He told me you died." She didn't cry. She didn't look sad. She just threw her head back and laughed. It was the coldest sound I've ever heard. She said, "No, darling, he just wished I had." Cubby stepped in front of me. He's a big guy, 6'2". He put his arm out to block her. "Back off," he said. His voice was low, dangerous. The woman in the trench coat just smiled. It was a thin, cold smile. She adjusted her collar. Then a man in a gray suit pushed through the crowd. "Let's take this to the rectory," he said. "Please, follow me." We walked down a long, dark hallway. The floorboards creaked under our feet. I could hear the organ music starting up in the sanctuary. Mournful, slow. It felt like a funeral march. For me. We entered the church office. It was a small room. Dusty. The air smelled of incense and old wool carpet. There were 3 metal folding chairs. I sat in the middle one. Across from me sat the lawyer, Elias Thorne. I knew him. We had dinner at his house last Christmas. Now he wouldn't look me in the eye. He just stared at his papers. Meredith sat in the chair next to me. She crossed her legs. She looked calm, collected. She took a compact mirror out of her purse. She checked her lipstick, red, like blood. You know that feeling when you know bad news is coming? That icy knot in your stomach? I had that. I had it bad. Mrs. Vance, the lawyer said. He was nodding at her. Not me. I have reviewed the documents. He slid a laminated card across the table. A marriage certificate. It was from Ohio, Cuyahoga County. The date was August 14, 1989. I felt the blood drain from my face. That was before we met, I whispered. He told me she died. She is very much alive, the lawyer said. He still wouldn't look at me, and there is no record of a divorce, Padma. None. He tapped the Ohio certificate. Under Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 207, Section 6, your marriage is void. I stared at the word. Void. Empty. Nothing. Void ab initio, he read aloud. Void from the beginning. I looked down at my own hand. My wedding ring felt heavy, a gold band with a small diamond. I remembered when he gave it to me. We were on a boat in the Charles River. It was 2000. The sunset was purple and orange. He held my hand. Padma, he said, you are my home. I was a fool. I was a librarian who didn't check the reference shelf. Legally, the lawyer continued, you were never married. You are a cohabitant at best. I paid for the house, I said. My voice was shaking. I paid for the renovations. I paid for the car. Meredith snapped her compact shut. Click. It sounded like a gunshot in that small room. And that is tragic, she said. She actually looked bored, but irrelevant. Everything he had, the house, the accounts, the life insurance, it belongs to the legal spouse. Cubby slammed his hand on the table. This is bullshit, he yelled. She was his wife for 22 years. The lawyer flinched. He adjusted his glasses. Cavi, please. I am just telling you what the law says. I sat there, frozen. I looked around the room. A crucifix on the wall. A stack of Bibles on the desk. A dying plant in the corner. My whole life was a lie. And this woman, this stranger, was sweeping it away. The lawyer picked up a pen. He clicked it, click. He finally looked at me. His eyes were sad, pitying. I'm sorry, Padma, he said softly. I truly am, but the law is clear. He turned to the woman. Legally, Mrs. Vance, he said to her, then turned to me. Padma, you are a stranger to this estate. Cobby slammed his hand down on the oak desk. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the small office. He screamed, she is not a stranger, she is my mother. Elias Thorne didn't even look up, he just kept shuffling his papers. I stood there frozen. My whole body felt like ice. Meredith smoothed her skirt. She looked at me with pity. It was worse than the hate. She said, "I'll see you at the house, Padma." Then she walked out. Kavi turned to me. His face was red. He said, "Mom, come on. We're leaving." I followed him out of St. Luke's. The rain was coming down hard. It soaked right through my blouse. We got into the car. Kavi gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. We drove to Union Park in silence. The wipers slapped against the glass. Thump, thump, thump. I looked at the brownstones passing by. They all looked like strangers to me. I checked the records twice. I kept thinking about the marriage license. How could I be so stupid? You know that feeling when your reality is just dissolving? That was me, in the passenger seat. We pulled up to number 42. My hydrangeas were crushed in the mud. Meredith's sedan was already parked out front. She was standing on the porch. Under the light, she had a key in her hand. I didn't recognize it, but it fit. She unlocked the deadbolt. Kavi jumped out of the car. He ran up the steps. He shouted, "You can't go in there." Meredith didn't even blink. She opened the door. She said, "Watch me." She walked inside. Kavi looked back at me. He looked helpless. We followed her into the hallway. It smelled like lemon polish. That was my scent. Now it felt like a trap. Meredith walked into the living room. She took off her wet coat. She draped it over my sofa, like she lived here. Because she did. She opened her purse. She pulled out a folded piece of paper. She slapped it down on the coffee table. She said, "I thought you might want to see this." I picked it up. It was a property deed. Suffolk County Registry of Deeds. Grantor, Arthur Vance. Grantee, Arthur Vance. Dated November 12, 1995. There was no Padma on that paper. Just Arthur. I remembered when we bought this place. We paid the mortgage together. Every month. For 22 years. He told me he added my name. He said, "Trust me, Padma. It's boring legal stuff." I trusted him, and now I had nothing. I looked at Kavi. He was reading the deed over my shoulder. He looked sick. I checked the records twice. But I never checked the county files. I want to know what you would have done. Would you have screamed? Would you have cried? I just stood there, holding a piece of paper that said I didn't exist. Meredith walked around the room. She ran a finger over the mantel. She rubbed the dust between her fingers. She said, "He was so fastidious. He must have been miserable here." I clenched my fists. I remembered back at the church. She had mentioned he was allergic to penicillin. She knew his medical history. I knew his favorite coffee order. But she knew his secrets. She walked toward the kitchen. The floorboards creaked under her heels. We followed her, like ghosts in our own home. She stopped in front of the refrigerator. She opened the door. The light spilled out onto her face. She reached inside. She pushed aside the milk. She grabbed my blue Tupperware container. It was my chicken tikka masala. I made it last night. Before I found out he was a liar, she popped the lid. She sniffed it. She recoiled like she smelled something rotten. Then she threw it into the trash can. The glass shattered. She turned to look at me. She said, "Arthur hated spicy food." Then she looked around my yellow kitchen. She crossed her arms. She said, "I don't know what you've been doing here." Kavi slammed the front door. I could hear the deadbolt slide home behind us. We were locked out. My own home. It was 11:42 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was standing on the porch, shivering. My son was vibrating with rage next to me. He was pacing the length of the welcome mat. His hands were balled into fists. I looked at the hydrangeas by the steps. They were brown. Dead. Just like my life seemed to be. Kavi stopped pacing and grabbed my arm. "We are not done," he said. "This is not over." He practically dragged me to the car. I got in. He drove us to the only place left, the public library downtown. You know, I checked the records twice. I was going to check them a third time. We went straight to the computers in the reference room. The smell of old paper usually calms me. Not today. It felt suffocating. Kavi sat down at a terminal. He cracked his knuckles. "Okay," he said. If he never divorced her, there would be papers, a filing, a docket number. He typed Arthur Vance Divorce, Massachusetts into the search bar. I watched his face. He hit enter, the screen flickered, the results loaded. Nothing, just blank white space. "That's a glitch," I said. My voice sounded thin. Try the Boston Globe archives. Maybe it was in the paper. Kabi typed again. The timestamp on the article search was 1995. He scrolled down. Page after page of weddings. Obituaries. No Vances. Okay, fine, Kavi muttered. Let's go wider. Social Security Death Index. He was typing so hard the keyboard clattered. The screen turned blue for a second. Then the list appeared. One result. An Arthur Vance in Ohio. Died in 1988. That wasn't him. What about a birth certificate? I asked. You can't get a driver's license without one. Kabi pulled up the Ohio vital records. He entered Arthur's birth date, August 14, 1964. The system spun. No record found, the screen read. I felt cold. It was spreading from my chest to my fingertips. Try Massachusetts, I said. He told me he was born in Springfield. Kabi switched the database. He typed the name again. He hit search. 0 results. This is impossible, he said. Everyone has a birth certificate. I stared at the cursor blinking on the monitor. It was mocking me, just like that woman had mocked me. Keep looking, I whispered. There has to be something. Kavi opened a new tab. He went to the Ancestry.com homepage. He started a family tree. He put in the name Earl Baines. That was the name on the library card I found. The screen flashed red. No matches in public records, Kavi read aloud. He looked at me. His eyes were wide. Ma, he said, there is no record of him existing before 1996. We were standing on the sidewalk. It was raining. Cold October rain. Javi was holding the car door open for me. I wouldn't get in. I just stared at the house. My house. The lights were on in the kitchen. I could see the shadow of a woman moving around. Meredith. She was making tea. In my kitchen, using my favorite mug, Kavi grabbed my arm. His grip was tight. Ma, we have to go. We can't just stand here. I pulled away. I'm not leaving, Kavi. Not yet. He looked at me like I was crazy. Maybe I was? But I remembered the attic. Arthur's fishing tackle box. He never fished. Not once in 22 years. Why did he need a locked box in the attic? I needed to know. We waited in the car for an hour. The rain blurred the windshield. Then, at 2 p.m., the attic light went out. The bathroom light flickered on. Through the transom window, I saw the steam rising. She was in the shower. This was it, the window of opportunity. Kabi looked at the house. He looked at me. He sighed. If we get arrested, I'm telling the police you made me do it. We crept up the driveway. The wet gravel crunched under our shoes. I held my breath. Every sound felt like a gunshot. The back door was locked. Of course it was. But I remembered the spare key. It wasn't under the mat. Meredith was too smart for that. It was in the old fake rock by the hydrangeas. Arthur's idea. I reached into the wet dirt. My fingers closed around the cold plastic. There it was. I turned the key. The lock clicked. We were inside. The house smelled different. It smelled like floral perfume and bleach. It didn't smell like him. It didn't smell like old paper and pipe tobacco. We moved through the kitchen. I could hear the water running upstairs. The pipes were clanking. The old radiator hissing. We climbed the stairs to the second floor. The bathroom door was closed. I could hear Meredith singing. A faint, off-key melody. Kavi pointed to the attic stairs. The pull string was dangling. I reached up. I yanked it down slowly. The wooden ladder groaned. I froze. Meredith stopped singing. My heart hammered against my ribs. Then the water started again. I climbed up into the darkness. Kavi followed. The attic was freezing. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light from the window. It smelled like cedar and dry rot. There it was, in the far corner, behind a stack of cardboard boxes, the green Plano tackle box. I sat on the floor. My skirt soaked up the dust. I tried the latch. Locked. I didn't have a key. I looked around frantically. I saw a heavy iron bookend on a crate. A bust of Shakespeare. I grabbed it. I didn't think. I just swung it. Crash. The lock snapped. Shards of plastic flew across the floorboards. Kabi flinched. Ma! I ignored him. I lifted the lid, and my breath caught in my throat. Cash! Stacks of it, bundled in rubber bands that were crumbling to dust. 20s, 50s, hundreds. I started to count. My hands were shaking. 10,000, 20,000, 30, $40,000. At least, I know what you're thinking. Take the money and run. But I couldn't move. I just stared at it. This wasn't a savings account. This was a getaway fund. Was he planning to leave me? Underneath the money, there were passports. 3 of them. I opened the first one. The picture was Arthur, but the name was Arthur Vance. Issue date 1996. I opened the second one. Same face, same crooked nose, but the name was Thomas Gable. Issued in 1988. The third one said Silas Thorne, 1982. I felt like I was going to throw up. I checked the records twice. I checked them 100 times. But the man in those photos wasn't a ghost. He was a chameleon. At the very bottom of the box, wrapped in a red flannel shirt, was a photograph. A Polaroid, yellowed with age. I picked it up. It showed a younger Arthur. He was shirtless on a beach. He had a thick mustache. His posture was different. More aggressive. Confident. I flipped it over. Written in blue ballpoint pen were the words Earl and me, Daytona 1985. Earl. Who was Earl? Was that him? Was he Earl? And who was me? Then I saw it, taped to the inside lid of the box. A cheap black flip phone. A burner. I pressed the power button. The screen flickered to life. 1 bar battery. I opened the contacts list. It was empty. Except for one entry, just the letter M. My thumb hovered over the button. I knew I shouldn't. I knew I should just leave. But I had to know. I pressed call. I put the phone to my ear. It rang once. It rang twice. Then a sound cut through the silence of the attic. Ringing, sharp and loud. Not in my ear, but downstairs, coming from the living room. It was coming from Meredith's purse, and she was still in the shower. I didn't sleep a single minute that night. The sound of that phone ringing, it just wouldn't stop. It was echoing in my head. It was 3:17 a.m. when I finally got out of bed. I couldn't just lie there. I went into the home office. The room was pitch black. I turned on the small desk lamp. The yellow bulb buzzed. Outside, the autumn rain was hitting the window pane. It was a relentless tapping sound. The house felt empty, cold, like a tomb. I sat down in my leather chair. The seat was cold. I picked up the Polaroid again. The corners were fraying. Earl and me, Daytona 1985. Who was Earl? I opened my laptop. The screen lit up my face in the dark room. I typed Earl Baines into the search bar. My fingers were trembling. It took me 3 tries to type the name correctly. You know that feeling when your gut is screaming at you to stop, but you keep going anyway? I hit enter. The search results loaded slowly. There were hundreds of hits. Most were obituaries for other people. But then I saw it. An archive link. The Daytona Beach News Journal. Date October 14, 1994. The headline read, Local Man Vanishes Amid Fraud Investigation. I clicked on it. I held my breath. The page loaded, and there he was, a grainy, black and white mugshot. He was looking off to the side. He looked younger, much younger. He had a thick black mustache, and his hair was dark, not gray, but it was him. I checked the records twice. I zoomed in on the screen. I was looking for the scar. There it was. A jagged white line on his chin. I felt like I couldn't breathe. The caption read, Earl Baines wanted for wire fraud and identity theft. I kept reading. The article described a complex scheme. Forged checks, stolen mail, fake social security cards. It said he vanished before the police could arrest him. They said he was a ghost. Then a memory hit me. It was so vivid I almost fell out of my chair. It was 2005. We were at Logan Airport, Terminal C. It was crowded. The air smelled like jet fuel and cinnamon pretzels. We were supposed to fly to Jacksonville. I was so excited. I had packed my sun hat. But Arthur, he stopped walking. Right in the middle of the concourse. He froze. His face went completely pale. He started sweating. It was dripping down his forehead. He clutched his chest. He looked like he was having a heart attack. I grabbed his arm. I asked him what was wrong. He looked at me with pure terror. He said, Padma, I can't do this. The air. It's too heavy. My allergies. We left the airport. We came home. He stayed in bed for 2 days. I canceled the tickets. I felt so guilty for dragging him there. But he wasn't sick. He was terrified that Florida would recognize him. And honestly, if you've ever been lied to like that, you know the feeling. It makes you question your own memories. I scrolled down to the bottom of the article. There was a small update, dated 1998. It said the case had gone cold. It said Earl Baines was presumed dead. The police thought he had been killed by his partners, or that he had drowned trying to flee the country. But he wasn't dead. He was in Boston, checking out books from my library. I couldn't look at that mugshot anymore. It was too much. I slammed the laptop shut. The screen went black, but his face was burned into my retinas. I sat in the dark office. The rain was still hammering against the window pane. It was 3:30 a.m. The house felt like a tomb. The air was heavy and damp. But I couldn't stop. I had to know where the name Arthur Vance came from. Earl was the criminal, but Arthur was the mask he wore to get close to me. I opened the laptop again. The white light from the screen hurt my eyes. I navigated to the Ohio Historical Society's newspaper archive. It's a habit from my library days. I typed in the search parameters. Arthur Vance, obituary 1980s. I hit enter. The results loaded slowly, 3 hits. I clicked the first one. It was the Columbus Dispatch. November 14th, 1986. The headline was short. Brutal. Arthur Vance, Sebin, D's in crash. I stared at the screen. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I scrolled down the page. There was a photo, a grainy scan of a school picture. A little boy, big ears, a gap-toothed smile. He was holding a stuffed dog. This was the name I whispered every night for 22 years. It belonged to a corpse in a child's grave in Ohio. You know that feeling when the ground disappears beneath you? That was this moment. I opened a new tab. I went to Ancestry.com. The green logo spun in the center. My hands were shaking so bad I mistyped my password twice. I searched for the Vance family tree. And there it was, a public tree. It showed Robert Vance and Sarah Vance, and their son, Arthur, born 1979, died 1986. Next to his name was a little icon, a gray tombstone. I checked the records twice. I checked the census data just to be sure. In 1990, there was no Arthur Vance living in Ohio because he was dead. But then, in 1996, an Arthur Vance suddenly appeared in Boston, a driver's license, a lease, a marriage license to me. He stole a dead boy's social security number. He used it to build a fortress of lies. But here's the thing. He didn't just take the name, he curated it. I took a sip of my coffee from the mug on the desk. It was ice cold. It tasted like ash in my mouth. I looked closer at the family tree on Ancestry. Arthur had a sister listed. Meredith Vance, born 1975. I felt the blood drain from my face. My lips went numb. Meredith, the woman in the trench coat, the legal wife. She wasn't his wife. She was the sister of the boy whose identity he stole. I want to know what you would do. Would you call her, or would you run? Did she help him kill her brother's memory, or was she another victim? I looked at the little boy's face on the screen again. My husband, the man who brought me tea when I was sick, was a ghoul. He fed on a dead child's legacy to hide his own crimes. The sun was starting to come up. A gray, sickly light filtered through the curtains. I looked at the empty chair across from me. The leather was worn where he used to sit. He wasn't just a bigamist. He was a ghost, and I fell in love with the ghost. I watched the sun rise over the Charles River. It was 6 a.m. The light was gray. It felt like a bruise. I hadn't slept, not even for a minute. I just sat in the leather chair, staring at the school photo of the dead boy. The real Arthur Vance. He looked nothing like my husband. My husband was a ghost. A ghoul wearing a dead child's name. And down the hall, his so-called wife was sleeping in my guest room. I stood up. My knees popped. The silence in the house was heavy. It pressed against my ears. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't wait for coffee to wake up. This was between us women, the ones who were fooled. I walked into the home office. The printer sat on the desk, dark and silent. I turned it on. The green light blinked. I opened the laptop. I pulled up the mugshot. Earl Baines, 1994, Daytona Beach. You want to talk about chilling? Look into the eyes of a con man who has been lying for decades. I hit print. The machine whirred to life. The sound was sharp. Too loud for this house. The paper slid out, warm to the touch. I grabbed it. I grabbed the obituary of the little boy, too. My hands were shaking, just a little tremor. I checked the records twice. This was the truth. The only truth left. I walked out of the office. The hallway was long and dark. I could smell coffee brewing and something else, lavender. It was coming from the kitchen. I took a breath. My heart was hammering against my ribs. This was it. The moment of truth. I reached the archway. The kitchen was bright. Too bright. Meredith was standing by the island. She was wearing a silk robe. It was cream-colored. Expensive. She was holding a delicate china cup. Steam was rising from it. She looked like she owned the place. I felt a flash of hot anger. I stepped into the light. She looked up. Her eyes were cool, calculating. She didn't look surprised to see me. She just took a sip of tea. I didn't speak. I just walked over to the granite island. I slammed the papers down. Thud. The sound echoed in the room. I pointed at the mugshot. My finger was trembling. "Stop acting," I said. My voice was raspy. "I know who he is. I know what he is." I tapped the picture of Earl Baines, the scar on the chin, the dead eyes. This is the man in that coffin, not Arthur Vance. Arthur Vance died when he was 7 years old. I watched her face. I waited for the lies. I waited for the lawyer to speak. But none of that came. She didn't look at me. She only looked at the photo. Her eyes widened. Her lips parted. Just slightly. Then her hand opened. The china cup fell. It hit the floor. Crash. It shattered into a dozen pieces. Tea splashed across the tile, brown liquid pooling on the white grout. She didn't even flinch. She didn't look at the mess. She just stared at that picture. "He's really dead," she whispered. Her voice was barely a breath. "He's finally gone?" I froze. Have you ever been so sure of something, and then the rug just gets pulled out? I thought she was in on it. I thought she was his partner in crime. I was wrong. Her knees buckled. She grabbed the edge of the counter. She slid down to the floor, right into the spilled tea. The silk robe soaked it up. She didn't care. She buried her face in her hands. But she wasn't crying. She was laughing. A low, jagged sound. It sounded like glass breaking. I stepped back. I didn't understand. She looked up at me. Tears were cutting tracks through her makeup. "You have no idea," she said. "You have no idea what it was like." She wiped her face with a trembling hand. I wasn't his wife. Not really. I was his alibi. I was his anchor to the world of the living. She reached out and touched the mugshot. Her finger traced the face of the man who ruined us. "I've been looking over my shoulder for 30 years, she whispered. She looked me dead in the eye. "I married you because you were his new jailer, not his lover." The tea was still steaming on the granite island. A shard of china lay near Meredith's feet. She didn't move. I just stared at her. The silence in the kitchen was heavy. "Jailer," she had said. The word hung in the air like smoke. I looked at the broken cup again. It was the same pattern Arthur bought on our trip to London. Now it was just garbage on the floor. I thought about that word. Jailer. Was I really? Had I been keeping him prisoner without even knowing it? You know that feeling when the floor drops out from under you? That was this moment. I leaned against the counter. My legs felt like they might give out. I watched Meredith pull a tissue from her pocket. She wiped her eyes. Then she reached into her purse. I braced myself. I thought she was going for a weapon. But her hand came out holding a crumpled piece of paper. She slid it across the island toward me. I hesitated, then I picked it up. It was lined notebook paper. The edges were yellowed with age. The ink was faded blue. It read, 404 Union Park. He's there. Don't go. The handwriting was shaky. At the bottom, the date was scrawled, 2002. I froze. Union Park. That was us. We moved into that brownstone in 2001. She knew where we were the whole time. She was watching us. But she didn't come for him. She stayed away. I looked up at her. My hands were shaking. "Why didn't you come?" I asked. "Why didn't you tell me?" She looked down at her hands. They were clasped tight in her lap. "Because I was terrified," she whispered. "I couldn't find him to serve the papers. And when I finally found him, I was scared to death." I remembered something then. A memory from 2003. Arthur used to check the locks. Every single night. 3 times. He would pace the living room. He would peek through the blinds. I thought he was just being cautious. A creature of habit. But now I knew. He wasn't checking for burglars. He was checking for her. He was checking for the police. He was checking for Earl Baines catching up with him. I looked around my kitchen. The mahogany cabinets. The copper pots. It all felt like a movie set. A stage for his performance, and we were both just actors in his play. I couldn't divorce a ghost, Meredith said softly, but I couldn't let him go either. She looked at me then, really looked at me. For the first time, I didn't see an enemy. I saw a reflection. Two widows of one monster. We sat there for a long time. The sun was fully up now. Dust motes danced in the light. It felt so strange. So quiet. So what do we do now? I asked. My voice sounded small. I knew what you're thinking. Why team up with the woman who stole your house? But here is the thing. She has the legal right to this place. I have the memory of the man. Neither of us has the full truth. Meredith straightened her back. She smoothed her skirt. He didn't leave us with nothing, she said. He was too greedy for that. She pulled the laminated marriage certificate out of her bag. He had money. He had accounts. We just have to find it. I felt a flicker of something. It wasn't hope. Not yet. It was determination. I remembered the cash in the tackle box, over $40,000. That was just the emergency fund. If he had that much lying around, what else was hidden? I checked the records twice on the property taxes. There were always discrepancies. I thought it was just government inefficiency. Now I knew better. It was him, hiding assets, burying the past. We looked at each other across the granite island. We split it, I said. 50-50. Meredith nodded. 50-50, she agreed. We shook hands. Her skin was dry and cool, just like his. We agreed to work together. We would find his hidden assets and split them. It seemed fair. I held the brass key up to the morning light. It was small, heavy. Number 420 etched into the bow. Just a number. No bank name. No logo. We were chasing a ghost across Boston with nothing but a piece of metal. Coffee stood in the kitchen doorway. He was wearing his pajamas still. He looked at me, then at Meredith. His jaw was tight. We are working with her now? He asked. We have to, I said. I didn't look at him. I couldn't. I reached back into the green tackle box, past the fake passports, past the stack of rubber-banded cash. My fingers brushed against cold metal. I pulled it out. Safe deposit, Meredith said. She leaned over the granite island. Her shoulder brushed mine. I pulled away instinctively. Old habits die hard. You know that feeling when you're standing next to the person who ruined your life, but you're too tired to hate them? That was me. We tried the big branches first, I said. He liked the old buildings. Boston traffic was brutal. Stop and go on Starro Drive. The rain had started again. Gray sheets of water hitting the windshield. The silence in the car was suffocating. I could hear Coffee tapping his foot on the floor mats. Meredith was looking out the window, watching the city pass by. He always liked the view of the Charles, she said quietly. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Please don't do that. Don't talk about him like you knew him. I knew him longer, she said. I just didn't know him better. And that is the tragedy, isn't it? 22 years of my life, 30 years of hers. Neither of us knew the man. First stop, downtown, a glass tower, wrong key. The teller barely looked at us before shaking her head. Second stop, Brookline, a brick branch with peeling paint. Wrong fit again. We were running out of hope, and honestly, I wanted to give up. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. Third stop was in Cambridge, a small stone building near the river. It looked like a fortress. The manager was a young man, nervous. He took the key from my palm. This fits our safe deposit boxes, he said. His hand was trembling slightly. He led us back. The air was cold. Smelled like old money and metal. The vault door groaned open. It was a heavy grinding sound. He slid the box into a private viewing booth. He left us alone, just the three of us, and a steel box. If you've ever been in a bank vault, you know the silence. It's heavy. It presses on your ears. I put the key in the lock, turned it, the latch clicked. I opened the lid. I expected cash. I expected bonds. Maybe even another passport. It was a manila envelope. Just one. I pulled out the papers. Standard legal font. Pacific Life Insurance Company. I read the date. It was issued 3 months ago. September, he was planning. Kavi whispered. He was right. Arthur was planning something right before he died. I looked at the access log the manager had given me. Arthur had been here 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks. He was healthy. He was smiling. He was hiding $2 million in this box. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I looked at the face value, $2 million. My knees actually buckled. I had to grab the edge of the table to stay upright. 2 million. Kavi breathed. That's the house. That's everything. I looked for the name. The beneficiary. Where was the money going? Who was he leaving this fortune for? I ran my finger down the page. It wasn't my name. It wasn't Meredith's name. It was a trust. The Vance Family Trust. I stopped. I looked at Meredith. Her face had gone pale, white as a sheet. What trust? She asked. My brother had no trust. Meredith kept repeating herself. My brother had no trust. She looked at me. Her eyes were wide. I don't know what this is. I looked at the paper. The Vance Family Trust. It was typed in bold letters. I checked the date. September 14th. 3 months ago, Arthur was alive then. He was dying. And he was setting this up. I felt cold. My hands were shaking. I put the paper down. Kavi was typing on his laptop. The sound was loud in the quiet kitchen. Click, click, click. Found it, Kavi said. He turned the screen around. It was a business listing. A registered agent in New Hampshire. Sarah Vance, Kavi read. Manchester. I looked at the address. It was 2 hours north. I grabbed my keys from the hook. We are going now, I said. You know that feeling when you were driving on autopilot? That was the ride. The ride to New Hampshire. It was pouring rain on I-93. The wipers were slapping back and forth. Thump, 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 thump. Meredith sat in the passenger seat. She was clutching her purse. Cabby was in the back. Nobody spoke. What could we say? We were driving to meet a ghost named Sarah. We got off the highway. The streets were dark. Wet leaves were stuck to the road. We followed the GPS. It took us to a quiet neighborhood. The houses were set far back from the road. We pulled into the driveway of number 42. It was a small cottage. The light was on in the window. I turned off the engine. The silence rushed in. My heart was hammering. Are you ready for this? Kavi asked from the back seat. No, I wasn't ready. I got out of the car. The rain was cold. It soaked my cardigan immediately. We walked up the path. The porch light was yellow. I knocked on the door. It felt heavy, solid. The door swung open. A woman stood there. She looked about 40 years old. She was wearing a gray sweater. Her hair was pulled back in a clip. And then I saw it. The nose, the chin, the shape of her eyes. It was Arthur. It was like someone had punched me in the stomach. I couldn't breathe. I just stared at her. She looked at the three of us. We were soaking wet. We looked crazy. Can I help you? She asked. Her voice was deeper than mine. But the cadence, the rhythm, it was his voice. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. But I stood there. Are you Sarah Vance? I asked. She nodded slowly. Yes, she said. I'm Sarah. Meredith stepped up beside me. My name is Meredith Vance, she said. This is my son. And this is... She paused. She didn't know what to call me. Padma, I said. We found the insurance policy. Sarah's face didn't change. She didn't look surprised. She stepped back. She opened the door wider. You better come in, she said. We walked into her hallway. It smelled like lavender and wood smoke. It was warm, too warm. The walls were covered in framed photos. I walked over to the nearest one. It was a picture of a little girl. She was sitting on a man's shoulders. The man was facing away from the camera, but I knew that jacket. It was a brown leather jacket. Arthur wore that jacket every fall. My hands were trembling so hard I had to clasp them together. I looked further down the wall. There was a document in a heavy black frame. It wasn't a diploma. It wasn't a birth certificate. I walked closer. I squinted at the small text. It was a DNA test. Genetic testing laboratory, the header read. Paternity test. I read the names. Alleged father, Earl Baines. My breath hitched in my throat. Earl Baines. That was him. That was the man under all the names. Silas. Thomas. Arthur. Earl. Child. Sarah Baines. I looked up a date. 1982. 30 years ago. He had a daughter. He had a child he hid from everyone. He hid her from me. He hid her from Meredith. He hid her from the world. And look at her now. She was living in a nice house. A house paid for by my husband's blood. I turned around to look at Sarah. She was watching me. She wasn't confused anymore. She wasn't the innocent victim I imagined. She was calm. Calculating. She walked over to a small desk in the corner. She opened a drawer. She took out a thick manila folder. She placed it on the desk. I was wondering when you would show up, she said. She didn't say it with sadness. She said it like she was expecting a package. Like this was just another transaction. I looked at that folder. I looked at her face, the face of the man I loved. But here's the thing. She didn't find him. He found her, and she knew exactly who he was. She knew he was Arthur Vance. She knew he was a fraud, and she helped him create the trust. He didn't just have 2 wives. He had a daughter, and she was in on it the whole time. If this story is hitting you as hard as it's hitting me, please do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. There is so much more you need to hear. Drop a like if you made it to the end of this chapter. And please tell me in the comments what you would do. I read every single one. The folder sat between us like a bomb. I looked up at Sarah. She had his chin. She had his eyes. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt tight. This girl was his daughter. His flesh and blood. Sarah gestured to the beige sofa. Please, she said. Sit down. We were in her living room now. It smelled like lemon polish and old dust. The curtains were drawn shut. The room felt like a tomb. Meredith sat down heavily beside me. She looked like a ghost. We were both trapped in this mess. Sarah opened the manila folder. Her hands were steady. Mine were shaken like leaves in the wind. She pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was covered in medical jargon. I knew that font. It was a hospital report. She slid it across the glass coffee table. Read this, she whispered. I reached out with trembling fingers. The header said, Massachusetts General Hospital, Department of Hematology and Oncology. The date was circled in red. October 14th. Last year. I read the diagnosis. Stage IV pancreatic adenocarcinoma. The words hit me like a physical blow. Metastasis to the liver. Chemotherapy initiated. Prognosis poor. I dropped the paper. It fluttered to the floor. 18 months ago, Sarah said softly. He didn't tell you. I felt the blood drain from my face. 18 months? We were married 22 years. He spent the last year dying in secret. My mind flashed back to last winter. Arthur sitting in his leather armchair. He looked so frail. I remember knitting him a sweater. He looked like a skeleton drowning in gray wool. I asked him, "Are you eating enough?" He just smiled, that tight fake smile. "Intermittent fasting, Padma," he said. "It's the new trend. I feel amazing." He wasn't fasting. He was dying of cancer. He was in pain. He was throwing up. He was terrified, and he never said a word to me. I sat there on that beige sofa. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw things. If you have ever been lied to by someone you love, you know this feeling. It's worse than anger.
Whatever.
It's hollow. Sarah leaned forward. He found me 5 years ago, she said. He came to Manchester. She looked at Meredith. He told me he was sick. He said he needed to make things right. He set up the trust for me, she continued. He used the Vance identity because it was clean. It was the only one that was. He was a ghost. He was Silas. He was Thomas. He was Earl. But to the IRS and the bank, he was Arthur Vance, and he used that name to save his money. He left me with nothing, but he made sure his daughter was set for life. I looked around the room. Expensive lamps. A thick Persian rug. This was bought with my husband's money. Sarah looked down at her hands. I thought he was just eccentric. A paranoid dad. I didn't know. Meredith let out a sob. It was a broken sound. He was my brother, she whispered. But he wasn't. Sarah looked up at me. Her eyes were wet. He talked about you, Padma. He talked about you all the time. My heart skipped a beat. He did? He told me you love books, she said. He said you read to him every night. I remembered the Dickens novels on the nightstand, the poetry he pretended to hate but listened to anyway. He said he loved you, Sarah told me. Her voice cracked. Then why? I asked. My voice sounded like a stranger's. Why leave me with nothing? Why let me lose the house? Can you believe that? He left me to fend for myself while he hid millions for her. And honestly, I want to know what you would have done. Sarah picked up a framed photo from the end table. It was just a picture of a boat on the ocean. She turned it over in her hands. He said his name was a Cage. She looked me right in the eye. The resemblance was uncanny. It hurt to look at her. He said if you knew who he really was, you'd be in danger too. Danger. That word hung in the air like thick smoke. I stared at Sarah. The rain was hammering against the window pane. It was a heavy, relentless sound. Sarah sat on the edge of the glass coffee table. She looked tired. She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. He was paranoid, Padma. But he had a reason. She pointed to the medical report still in my hand. He was sick. But even before that, he was fragile. I looked down at the paper. Stage IV pancreatic cancer. But Sarah kept talking. My father, Earl, he had so many allergies. Peanuts, latex. She paused. She looked me right in the eye. But especially penicillin. One drop in his throat would close up. I felt the blood drain from my face. Penicillin. I gripped the armrest of the beige sofa. The fabric was rough under my fingers. This couldn't be right. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 8:15 p.m. I flashed back to our kitchen in Boston. It was February 2019. Arthur had a terrible sinus infection. I remember standing at the sink, filling a glass of water. On the counter sat the orange prescription bottle. The label was white, printed in black, bold letters, amoxicillin 500 milligrams. It was a penicillin derivative. I watched him take 2 capsules. He swallowed them with water. He didn't even blink. No hives. No swelling. No ambulance ride to Mass General. He just sat there and ate his roast chicken. I looked back at Sarah. She was watching me closely. He went into anaphylactic shock when he was 6, she said softly. Nearly died. I stood up. My legs felt like jelly. I walked over to the mantel. The photos were lined up there. Family pictures. Sarah growing up here, Sarah said. She stood up and walked over to me. She pointed to a picture in a wooden frame. This is us. Daytona Beach, 1983. I picked up the frame. It was heavy. Dust lined the edges. It was a Polaroid, a young man holding a baby. The man had a thick mustache and dark hair. He was wearing a red t-shirt that said Daytona. But it was the ears that caught my attention. They were small, flush against the side of his head. Attached earlobes. I nearly dropped the frame. My heart started pounding in my chest. Thump, thump, thump. I put the frame down on the mantel. I turned to look at Sarah. She was smiling, a cold, small smile. See the resemblance? She asked. I remembered Arthur sitting in his leather chair. We were watching a documentary about elephants. He laughed. He grabbed his earlobes and pulled them out. Look at these, he said, grinning. Dumbo ears. Detached. Just like my mother's. He did that all the time. It was a nervous tic. Arthur had detached earlobes. The man in this photo had attached earlobes. They were not the same man. My eyes drifted to the wall behind her. The DNA test. The one proving Arthur was Sarah's father. It was a lie, just like the trust. Just like the name. Sarah wasn't his daughter, she was his partner. I looked at the medical report in my hand. The man I lived with for 22 years. The man I buried. If he wasn't Earl Baines, who was he? And if Sarah was lying about being his child, who was really in that coffin? I backed up towards the door. My hand was shaking. Sarah didn't move. She just stood there by the fireplace. We're going to figure this out, Padma, she said. But I didn't believe her. Have you ever realized you were sleeping next to a stranger? Because that is exactly how I felt in that moment. The room was spinning. I needed to get out of there. I needed to know who was in that grave. But before I could reach the door, my phone buzzed in my pocket, one notification. And this is where it gets truly terrifying. Because I knew without looking that my life was about to get much worse. What would you have done? Would you have run or stayed to fight? Because honestly, I think I just made the biggest mistake of my life. I stared down at the medical report in my hands. The paper felt thin, cheap. I looked at the header again, Massachusetts General Hospital. The font was Times New Roman, but the surname was wrong. The letters were too tight. I checked the records twice. MGH uses a serif font, yes, but not this one. It was a copy. A bad one. I looked at the doctor's name, Dr. Eris Thorne. I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped it. I searched the MGH staff directory. No results. I searched the state medical board for Massachusetts. Nothing. The man who signed my husband's death certificate didn't exist, and neither did the cancer. I looked up at Sarah. She was sitting on the beige sofa, watching me. She took a slow sip of tea. Her eyes were completely dry. "You're very quiet, Padma," she said. I didn't answer. I just looked at the glass coffee table. Her phone was sitting right there. The screen lit up. A notification. A calendar reminder. I lunged. My hand closed around the iPhone before she could move. "Hey!" she screamed. She stood up, knocking her cup over. Tea splashed onto the white rug. I didn't care. I thumbed the screen. It was unlocked. I opened the call log. You know that feeling when you find the last piece of a puzzle you didn't want to solve? I scrolled down, call after call to the same number. Area code 345. I know that code. That's the Cayman Islands. I looked at the timestamps. 3:14 a.m. on a Tuesday, 4:45 a.m. on a Saturday, always when Arthur was asleep. The dates went back 5 years, but the last call was 3 days ago. October 18th, the day he died. I threw the phone onto the sofa cushions. It bounced. "The hospital is fake," I said. My voice wasn't shaking anymore. It was hard, cold. "The doctor's fake. This whole report is a forgery." Sarah stopped screaming. She smoothed her skirt. She looked at me like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "You check your sources," she said. "I'll give you that. It's a useful trait for a librarian." She walked toward the fireplace. I backed toward the front door. I could feel the brass knob against my spine. "He was a mark," she said. "That's all. Earl found him in a bar in Daytona. A guy with cash, no ID, no past." She picked up a silver frame from the mantel. It was empty. We built the Arthur Vance identity. We were going to bleed the trust dry. But then she actually sighed. Like she was inconvenienced. "He got sick. For real. Pancreatic cancer. It ruined everything." She turned to face me. The light from the hallway made her face look like a skull. "We couldn't move the assets with a dying man in the middle of it. It was too risky." I felt like I was going to throw up. "The trust," I said. "The insurance. The policy for $2 million?" Sarah started laughing. It was a sharp, jagged sound. "Oh, honey, you really don't get it." She took a step closer. And Schwelling. Lilies and chemical cleaner. "The Vance family trust is a shell. It's empty. There is no money." My knees hit the edge of the coffee table. I had to steady myself. "But the box," I whispered. "The cash. The passports." "Spent," she said. "Gone." She looked at me with pure hatred. Her lip curled. "He didn't lose it. He didn't get conned." She pointed a finger at my chest. "He spent it all on that house for you. You were the one draining him dry. Tell me in the comments, do you believe her? Because I don't know what is true anymore." The door to Sarah's house clicked shut behind us. It felt like a gunshot in the quiet night. We didn't speak. We just walked to Meredith's sedan. The rain was coming down harder now, cold and stinging against my face. I climbed into the passenger seat. The leather was damp. The air inside smelled like old paper and vanilla air freshener. It smelled like him. I felt my stomach turn over. We pulled onto the highway. I-95 South was a ribbon of red taillights in the dark. The rhythmic click of the turn signal filled the silence. Click, click. Meredith gripped the steering wheel so hard her knuckles were white. She stared straight ahead. I looked down at the deed in my lap. The paper was soft from being handled so many times. I traced the letters with my thumb. Arthur Vance. That was the name on the title to our home. The home I had spent 22 years filling with books and laughter. It was all built on a ghost. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't we just call a lawyer? Why not fight for the house? But here is the thing. If we claim that house, we have to prove who Arthur was. And Arthur Vance was a dead 7-year-old boy from Ohio. The second we file for inheritance, the FBI opens an investigation. They find Earl Baines. They find the passports. They find us, 2 widows who lived with a fugitive for decades. Do you think they would believe we were innocent? I remember the day we refinanced the mortgage. It was 2004, a Tuesday afternoon. I sat at the kitchen table. The sun was hitting the oak table just right. I picked up the pen. Arthur was standing by the refrigerator. He wouldn't come near the table. He said, "You sign it, Padma. Your handwriting is better." I thought he was being sweet. Or lazy. I signed my name on every line. Padma Vance. I was so proud of that name then. He just watched me. He never touched the paper. He was protecting himself. Even then, he was making sure I was the one tied to the paper trail. It wasn't a partnership. It was a shield. I looked at Meredith. The dashboard lights illuminated the tears tracking down her cheeks. She looked like a ghost of her brother. Same sharp nose, same dark eyes, but her expression was pure defeat. "It's a trap," she whispered. Her voice sounded like breaking glass. "The house is the bait. If we bite, they take everything." I thought about the amoxicillin, the pills he took for a sinus infection in 2019. He swallowed them with water. No allergic reaction, no swelling, no trip to the ER. But at the funeral, Meredith told everyone he was deathly allergic to penicillin. She believed it. He lied to her about his own body to keep distance. He lied to me about everything else to keep me close. I looked out the window. The Boston skyline was rising in the distance. It looked beautiful, but it felt like a graveyard. We were approaching Starro Drive, the exit for our home. My home. Or what I thought was my home. My hands were shaking so badly the deed rattled in my lap. I am 61 years old. I have a son who relies on me. I have nothing but the clothes on my back and a car full of lies. If we fight, we go to prison. If we walk, we go to poverty. I turned to Meredith. "We have to let him go," I said. The words tasted like ash. "If we claim to be his widows, we admit to being part of his fraud. We walk away with nothing." She nodded. She didn't say a word. She just put on her blinker. We drove past our exit. We kept driving into the dark. We drove back to the house in silence. The rain was finally stopping. It was 4:15 a.m. when we pulled into the driveway. The porch light was off. The house looked like a skeleton against the gray sky. I had dropped Cabby at a motel in Somerville an hour ago. He couldn't be here for this. He was too angry. We walked inside. The air was cold. The silence was heavy. I walked to the pantry. I pulled out 3 cardboard boxes. The packing tape gun made a loud ripping sound. It echoed in the empty hallway. Meredith sat on the sofa. She was staring at the wall. I started packing the books. I took Great Expectations off the shelf. The cover was faded. Arthur had bought it in London. You know that feeling? When you were touching things that belonged to a ghost? That is what this felt like. I moved to the bedroom. The closet smelled like cedar and mothballs. I had to clear out his suits. The wool was scratchy under my fingers. I knelt on the floor to reach the shoes. Then I saw it. The baseboard near the corner. It was slightly loose. I remember the winter of 2004. Arthur was home for a week. He said he was sick. But I heard him in here. Hammering. He was sweating. He was nervous. He told me he was fixing a termite hole. I checked the records twice. We never had termites. I ran my thumb over the wood trim. It was rough. Unfinished. Arthur was always so particular about details. This was sloppy. That is how I knew it was important. There was a tiny gap. Just a sliver of darkness. My heart started pounding. I could hear it in my ears. It sounded like a drum. Have you ever had a moment where your body knows something before your brain does? I knew there was something in there. I grabbed a metal nail file from my pocket. I jammed it into the crack. The wood snapped. A piece of the trim popped off. A puff of gray dust hit my face. It smelled like drywall and old paper. I coughed. I reached into the hole. My fingers brushed against metal. It was freezing cold. I pulled it out. It was a small steel box, about the size of a paperback novel. It was covered in cobwebs. My hands was shaking so hard I almost dropped it. The box clattered against the hardwood floor. Meredith appeared in the doorway. Her eyes were wide. She asked, "What is that?" I didn't answer. I just flipped the latch. The box popped open. There was no cash, no diamonds. Just a single sheet of paper and a brass key. The paper was yellowed at the edges. The creases were worn soft. I unfolded it. I recognized the handwriting immediately. The looped A. The aggressive T. It was Arthur. I held the paper up to the dim light of the closet. I read the words out loud. My voice was shaking. I never stole a life. I left mine behind to save it. The key is for a safety deposit box in Geneva. It's the only clean money. It's all for you, P. I looked at the key. It was old, heavy brass. It had a patina, green and gold. There was a stamp on the bow, a Swiss cross. Geneva? We never went to Geneva. We went to the Cape. I felt a hot tear hit the page. The ink started to bleed. He left me something that was just mine. And this is where it gets really messed up. Maybe he wasn't just a liar. Maybe he was a man trying to fix a mistake. I don't know if I can forgive him, but looking at that key, I felt a spark. Meredith walked over to me. She leaned in. She read the letter over my shoulder. I waited for her to yell, to grab the key, to fight me for it. But she didn't. She just let out a long breath. It sounded like a balloon deflating. She looked exhausted. The lines on her face were deep in the shadows. She whispered, "He really loved you, didn't he?" Her voice broke. It was barely a whisper. She said, "He didn't leave me anything. He left you a life." I looked at her. I saw the legal wife. I saw the sister of a dead boy. But right then, I just saw a tired woman. She nodded at the box. She said, "Take it. You earned it." She turned around. She walked back to the living room. I heard the zipper of her suitcase close. The sound was final, like a period at the end of a sentence. She picked up her bag. She walked to the front door. She opened it. The cold October wind rushed into the house. It smelled like rain and asphalt. It woke me up. She stepped out onto the porch. She didn't look back. The door clicked shut. I was alone. I sat on the closet floor. I was holding the key. I wasn't holding a lie anymore. I was holding a future. It is April now. 6 months have passed since I found that key in the floorboards. The cold rain in Boston is gone. I am sitting in a private banking office in Geneva, Switzerland. The air here is different. It is thin and crisp. It smells like mahogany and silence. The manager is a tall man in a gray suit. He speaks perfect English with a faint accent. He does not ask for my ID. He only asks for the brass key with the Swiss cross. I placed it on the velvet table. My hand was trembling, just a little. He turned the key in a lock I could not see. A heavy steel door slid open. He slid a metal box toward me. It was heavy. I recognized the make immediately. It was the same brand as the one in our closet. But this one was clean. No rust, no dust. He bowed slightly and left the room. The door clicked shut behind him. I was alone. I took a deep breath. I opened the lid. I know you might be expecting millions. I was too. But here's the thing. Arthur was a thief, not a billionaire. Inside there were stacks of bonds, government bonds, Swiss francs, British pounds. I picked up a stack. The dates went back 20 years. He was buying these while we were living in that apartment on Beacon Hill. I checked the value. It is substantial. Underneath the paper there was the weight. Gold bars. 5 of them. I lifted one out. It was terrifyingly heavy. The stamp on the bar read, "Credit Suisse." It was pure. It was real. I sat there with that gold bar in my lap. It felt like an anchor. The metal was cold against my palms. It felt solid in a world that had turned to mist. It is not a fortune. It is not $2 million, but it is enough. I did the math in my head right there. It is enough for a house. A small one. It is enough for Kavi's tuition. It is enough to never have to worry about the heating bill again. I want to know what you would do. Would you keep it or would you give it back? I checked the records twice. This money has no fingerprints. It is clean. I moved the gold aside. That is when I saw it. At the very bottom of the box, a single photograph. It was a Polaroid. The corners were soft with age. I picked it up. The air left my lungs. It was a picture of a grave. The headstone was granite. It was simple. The engraving read, Earl Baines, 1960-1994. The real Earl. The man whose identity Arthur stole. The man he pretended to be for 30 years. But look at the ground in front of the stone. There's a flower. A white lily. It is fresh. The photo is not faded like the others. This was recent. Arthur took this photo. He stood there at the grave of the man he wasn't, and he paid his respects. I turned the photo over. In his handwriting it said, Rest easy. 2 words. That was all. My hand started to shake again. I dropped the photo on the table. I looked at the gold. I looked at the grave. He spent his whole life running from that name. But in the end, he visited it. He mourned the ghost he lived inside. Do you think he felt guilty? Or was he just saying goodbye to the act? I don't know. I checked the records twice. I can't find a soul in those numbers. Kavi is waiting at the hotel. He cannot look at this money yet. He says it feels like blood. I told him it feels like survival. We will argue about it later. I sat in that room for an hour. The silence was loud. I realized something. He wasn't running from the law anymore. He was running to provide this. He buried his past so I could have a future. He was a liar, but he was my liar. If you have ever had to choose between the truth and safety, you know this feeling. It is not a happy ending. It is just a true one. I put the photo in my pocket. I closed the box. I rang the bell for the manager. I did not look back. We came back to Boston on a Tuesday. The sky was that terrible flat gray only New England does in April. I stood in the foyer of 403 Union Park. The house was empty. My boots echoed on the hardwood. It sounded like a gunshot in a church. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket. The screen was cracked, but the Zillow app still worked. I checked the listing one last time. The status banner was green. It said sold by owner. The price was $2.4 million. I didn't care about the money, or at least that's what I told myself. I ran my hand along the wall. There was a square patch of faded paint. That's where the wedding photo used to hang. The one with Arthur smiling in his brown leather jacket. Now it was just a wall. It felt like 2001 again. I could see us moving in. It was raining that day too. Arthur was carrying a box of my cookbooks. He slipped on the wet steps. He laughed. I remember thinking he was the most handsome man I had ever seen, but that Arthur was a ghost. He was Earl Baines then, or maybe Silas Thorne. I checked the records twice. I still don't know who he really was. Can you imagine living in a house for 22 years and realizing you never really knew the person you shared it with? A young couple was waiting outside on the sidewalk. They looked so hopeful. They were holding mugs of coffee from Dunkin'. The girl was pointing at the window boxes. She looked pregnant. I wondered if they would paint the nursery blue. I walked to the center of the living room. The floor was scratched. I looked down at the scratch marks. They were from when Kavi was learning to ride his scooter inside. He was 5. Arthur was chasing him. They were both laughing. The memory didn't hurt anymore. It just felt distant, like watching a silent movie. The air smelled like lemon polish and old dust. It didn't smell like Arthur's pipe tobacco. It didn't smell like him anymore. I remember the day we bought the house. He signed the deed alone. He said he was protecting me. He was protecting his secret. I was just a prop in his play, a convenient jailer to keep the world away. Kavi was waiting in the Uber by the curb. He refused to come inside. He said it smelled like a tomb. Maybe he was right. I signaled to him that I was almost done. I walked to the front window. The curtains were gone. The street was bright and loud with traffic. Then I saw her. Meredith. She was standing across the street under an old oak tree. She was wearing a beige trench coat. She looked smaller without her sharp heels and her anger. She saw me too. We didn't speak. There were no lawyers this time. No shouting about trusts or insurance policies. She just raised her hand. A small, sad wave. It wasn't a peace offering. It was an acknowledgement. 2 widows of the same lie. Tell me in the comments, do you think she ever loved him? Or was she just scared like I was? The young couple knocked on the door. It was time. I took a deep breath. My hand trembled a little as I unlocked the deadbolt. One last turn. One last click. I opened the door. They walked in. They were talking about paint colors. I just wanted to leave. I walked out into the cold air. The door clicked shut behind me. The contract was signed. The wire transfer from the Geneva account was confirmed. I checked my banking app. The numbers were staggering. Enough for a lifetime. Enough for Kavi's tuition. Enough to disappear. I looked at the brass keys in my hand. They were just pieces of metal now. They held no power over me. I walked to the mail slot in the front door. I slid them through. They hit the floor with a heavy jingle. I dropped the keys in the mail slot. I was free. I was alone. But I was rich. The rain is falling softly on the pavement of Saint-Germain-des-Prés. It is a cold gray Tuesday in late October. I am sitting at a small round table outside the Café de Flore. My trench coat is damp. My espresso is hot. The air smells like wet cobblestones, diesel exhaust, and roasting chestnuts. I watch the umbrellas passing by. Black, red, blue. A blur of motion in the rainy street. I am not watching the people, though. I am watching the cursor on my laptop screen. It blinks at me. Blink, blink, like a steady heartbeat. I pause my typing. I look down at my left hand. It has been exactly 6 months since I left Boston. The skin on my ring finger is pale, a thin white line. I twist the gold band one last time. It feels loose, like it belongs to a stranger. I take a deep breath. The air tastes like rain. I slide it off. I place the ring on the marble table. It clinks softly against the ceramic saucer. Just a circle of metal. It is not a promise anymore. It is just evidence. The waiter steps out from behind the counter. He is young, wearing a long white apron. He stops at my table to refill my water glass. He glances at the open document on my screen. Then he looks up at me with a polite smile. "Another espresso, Madame Vance?" he asks. My heart stutters. Just for a second, I look him in the eye. I feel the corners of my mouth turn up. "Yes, please," I reply. "Thank you." I do not correct him. I kept the name. It was the only thing he ever really gave me that was real. I look back at the laptop. The title page is staring back at me in bold black letters. It says, "The Ghost I Married, author Padma Vance." I checked the spelling twice. Vance. I am 50,000 words into this manuscript. I type a sentence. I delete it. I type it again. "She never knew him at all," I write. I stare at the words. Then I hit backspace. That is not true. She knew the version of him that loved her. And that was real too. I am writing about the space between the lies. About a woman who wakes up and realizes she is a character in someone else's novel. It is fiction, technically, but it is the truest thing I have ever written. Kavi is waiting for me in the apartment on Rue de Bouchy. He is better now. The paranoia is finally fading. He found a job at a little English bookstore around the corner. He says he likes the smell of old paper. He says it reminds him of the Boston Public Library. He reminds me of who I used to be. We have enough money to last forever. Arthur's stash in Geneva bought our freedom. But here is the thing. We are not living like millionaires. We are not buying yachts or diamonds. We are living like librarians, quiet, respectable, invisible. The waiter returns with the tiny cup. He sets it down gently. I take a sip of the fresh espresso. It is bitter, dark, perfect. I listen to the traffic on the Boulevard Saint-Germain. I watch the tourists taking photos of the cafe sign. I wonder how many of them are hiding a secret. You know that feeling when your gut tells you something is wrong? I ignored it for 22 years. If you have ever been in a relationship like that, you know, you just stop seeing the cracks in the walls. You learn to live in the draft. This is my confession. This is my reckoning. And now it is just my life. I am not the victim. I am the survivor. I picked up the pen. I wrote my own ending. Do you think I was too harsh or too kind? I honestly don't know anymore. And this is where it gets really interesting. I am happy. Can you believe that? If this story meant something to you, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I have more stories to tell. Some of them are even stranger than this one. Like this video, if you made it to the end. And drop a comment. Tell me what you would have done. I read every single one. I kept his name. It was the only thing he ever really gave me that was real.